Ethan Parker dragged himself through the front door, his tie crooked and his soul bruised from a day of wrestling spreadsheets and kissing up to a boss who smelled like stale cigars. He'd been grinding on brutal projects for weeks, chasing that sweet bonus like a dog after a mail truck. All he wanted was a warm meal, a cold beer, and maybe a shred of affection from his wife. What he got instead was a scene straight out of a disaster movie, minus the budget for special effects. The kitchen looked like a tornado had hit a frat house, dirty dishes piled in the sink, a half-eaten bag of chips spilling onto the counter, and a mysterious sticky puddle that Ethan prayed wasn't syrup. Or worse. Meanwhile, Vanessa Parker sprawled across the couch like a queen who'd fired her entire court, her phone glued to her ear as she cackled loud enough to wake a coma patient. "No, Sarah, I'm telling you, he's got the personality of a wet sock. Oh my God, you should have seen it," she howled, oblivious to the storm brewing in Ethan's hunched shoulders. He dropped his briefcase by the door and let out a sigh so heavy it could have sunk the Titanic. This wasn't new. Lately, Vanessa had been operating on a level of irresponsibility that made toddlers look like CEOs. The woman was a knockout, legs for days, eyes that could melt steel, a smile that once made Ethan forget his own name. But beauty wasn't paying the bills or scrubbing the mystery goo off the counter. He'd let it slide before, chalking it up to her charm, but charm was starting to feel like a lousy excuse. Ethan shuffled to the fridge, clinging to a flicker of hope for dinner. He opened the door and stared into the abyss. A carton of milk past its prime, a lone ketchup packet, and, yep, nothing else. The leftovers from Tuesday's takeout? Gone. Vanished. Probably sacrificed to the goddess of chaos lounging 10 feet away. His stomach growled as his eyes darted to the living room, where shopping bags from boutiques he couldn't pronounce littered the floor like trophies from a war he wasn't invited to fight. "Vanessa," he said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and barely contained rage. "What's the deal with dinner?" She didn't even glance up from her phone, just waved a manicured hand like she was swatting a fly. "Can't you see I'm busy talking? Order something yourself," she snapped, then dove back into her conversation with Sarah, her laughter slicing through the air like a serrated knife. Ethan clenched his jaw so hard his teeth squeaked. He was too wiped to start a fight, too drained to point out that he'd been breaking his back while she played retail warrior and phone-a-friend champion. Instead, he grabbed his phone, scrolled for the nearest pizza joint, and wondered how long a man could live on grease and regret before something snapped. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, hunched over a greasy pizza box like a man who just lost a war he didn't sign up for. The delivery guy had been the brightest spot in his night. Polite, prompt, didn't call him a control freak. He chewed mechanically, the taste of pepperoni doing nothing to dull the slow burn of irritation simmering in his gut. Vanessa was still sprawled on the couch, her voice bouncing off the walls as she regaled Sarah with tales of some influencer's latest scandal. Ethan wiped his hands on a napkin, took a deep breath, and decided it was now or never. If he didn't say something, he'd choke on more than just lukewarm mozzarella. "Vanessa," he started, standing in the doorway between the kitchen and living room. "Can we talk for a sec? Like actually talk?" She flicked her eyes up from her phone, one eyebrow arched like he'd just asked her to solve quantum physics. "What now?" she sighed, muting Sarah mid-sentence. "I'm kind of in the middle of something." Ethan crossed his arms, forcing calm into his voice. "Look, I'm not asking for the moon here. I just got home from a brutal day. Weeks of brutal days, actually, and it'd be nice if we could, I don't know, share the load a little. Keep the place from turning into a landfill. Maybe have something resembling dinner ready once in a while." Vanessa's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. She sat up, tossing her phone onto the cushion like a gauntlet. "Oh, I get it. You want me to play the little housewife, huh? Sorry, buddy, I'm not your maid. I'm not here to cater to your every whim like some 1950s sitcom reject." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the venom in her tone. "That's not what I'm saying. I just think we're supposed to be a team." "A team," she cut in, her voice rising like a siren. "Newsflash, Ethan, I'm not signing up for women's duties or whatever garbage cliché you've bought into. That's some nonsense cooked up by idiots who think a woman comes with a mop and an apron. If you want a spotless house and a 3-course meal, hire a damn maid. He opened his mouth to argue, to point out that teamwork wasn't about gender. It was about not living in a pigsty while he busted his ass to keep them afloat. But she wasn't done. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes blazing. And don't you dare try to guilt me into anything. I'm a woman, Ethan. I deserve praise, gifts, appreciation, not a chore list. You don't get to tell me what to do. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, stunned into silence. The words hit him like a slap, but it wasn't the rudeness that floored him. It was the realization sinking in like a stone. She didn't see him as a partner anymore. He was a walking ATM, a means to an end, a sucker who'd built her a cushy life she now took for granted. The Vanessa who'd once laughed at his dumb jokes and split a pizza with him on the floor of their first shitty apartment. Gone. Replaced by this entitled tornado who thought compromise was a dirty word. Vanessa, that's not fair, he managed, his voice low but shaky. I'm not asking you to be my servant. I'm asking you to give a damn about us. She snorted, picking up her phone again. Fair? Life's not fair, Ethan. Figure it out. And with that, she unmuted Sarah and dove back into her conversation, leaving Ethan standing there, pizza grease on his shirt and a cold, hard truth settling into his bones. His wife wasn't just checked out, she was rewriting the rules, and he was no longer a player in her game. The next morning, Vanessa breezed into the kitchen like a queen who'd already forgotten last night's coup. She hummed some pop tune, poured herself a coffee, and didn't so much as glance at the mess still haunting the counter, or at Ethan, who sat nursing a lukewarm mug of his own, his eyes bloodshot from a night of tossing, turning, and replaying her words on a loop. To her, it was business as usual. Chaos swept under the rug, no apologies, no regrets. To him, it was a wake-up call louder than a foghorn in a library. Ethan watched her over the rim of his cup, his jaw tight. Nothing was going to change unless he made it change. For months, heck, maybe years, Vanessa had been treating their bank account like her personal playground, blowing cash on designer bags, overpriced trinkets, and whatever trendy nonsense she'd seen on Instagram. A $300 candle that smelled like ocean vibes? Check. A sequined jacket she'd worn once and then banished to the closet? Yep. Delivery from some boutique that only sold artisanal soaps shaped like fruit? Paid for with his overtime. He'd let it slide. Too tired or too smitten to care. But now he saw it for what it was, a one-way ticket to broke, with him footing the bill while she played princess. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door, stealing a glance as Vanessa flopped onto the couch, already scrolling her phone with the focus of a sniper. Probably hunting for the next useless purchase to drain their dwindling funds. That was it, Ethan's breaking point. If she wasn't going to invest in their marriage, he sure as heck wasn't going to keep bankrolling her comfort. A plan sparked in his mind, cold and calculated, and by the time he hit the office, it was fully lit. Between meetings, Ethan pulled up their finances on his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys. The numbers didn't lie. Vanessa's spending was a black hole, and he'd been too passive to plug it. No more. First, he locked her out of their joint credit card. Access denied, princess. Then he siphoned most of the cash from their shared account, splitting it two ways. Half into crisp bills he'd stash later, half into cryptocurrency on a cold wallet USB he'd picked up months ago for a tech whim he'd never followed through on. Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever. He didn't care about the details, just that it was out of her reach. Back home, he'd find a spot to hide it all. Maybe behind that loose panel in the basement, or taped under his desk drawer. Somewhere Vanessa, who couldn't find her own keys half the time, would never look. He wasn't just protecting his money, he was protecting his future. Divorce was starting to feel less like a what if and more like a when, and he'd be darned if he walked away with nothing but regrets and a pizza-stained shirt. As he logged off and headed home, Ethan felt a flicker of something, relief maybe, or the first stirrings of revenge. Vanessa could scroll her way into oblivion, but he was done playing the fool. The game had changed, and this time he was holding the cards. Ethan walked through the door that evening, expecting the usual, Vanessa glued to her phone, the house a war zone of neglect. Instead, he was met with a Category 5 hurricane named Vanessa Parker. She stood in the living room, phone clutched like a weapon, her face a thundercloud of fury. "What the heck did you do to my credit card?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through steel. "It's blocked, Ethan. I tried to buy a freaking latte and it got declined, in front of everyone at the cafe." For once, Ethan didn't flinch. He dropped his keys on the counter, meeting her glare with a calm that felt foreign but good. "Yeah, I locked it," he said, casual as if he'd just mentioned the weather. "We're done with the free-for-all." Vanessa's eyes widened, and for the first time in forever, Ethan saw something flicker behind her usual smug veneer. Not arrogance, but fear. It was gone in a flash, replaced by a tidal wave of indignation. "You're punishing me? Are you serious? This is so unfair. You can't just cut me off like I'm some kid." Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. "I'm not punishing you, Vanessa. I'm just not your ATM anymore. You want to live like a queen? Fine, start pitching in. Help with the bills, the house, something, or learn to live within what you've got. I'm done footing the bill for your shopping sprees while I'm drowning in work." Her mouth opened, then shut, then opened again, like a fish flopping on dry land. She wasn't used to this Ethan, the one who didn't bend, who didn't apologize for breathing. "You're unbelievable," she finally spat, pacing the room. "You think you can control me? I'm not your little puppet." "I don't want to control you," he shot back, voice steady. "I want a partner, not a princess who thinks teamwork is a dirty word." Vanessa froze, her grip tightening on her phone. She didn't have a comeback, not a good one anyway. Ethan could see the gears turning, the slow crumble of her cushy little world hitting her like a ton of bricks. But instead of owning it, she did what she always did. She ran to her lifeline. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, already typing furiously. "Wait till Sarah hears about this. You're such a tyrant, Ethan." He didn't bother responding. Let her spin her sob story. Paint him as the big bad wolf to her posse of enablers. He had bigger fish to fry. While Vanessa stormed off to the couch, her voice rising as she vented to Sarah about her oppressive husband, Ethan slipped into the basement. He'd scoped the spot earlier, a loose panel behind the water heater just big enough for his stash. With a quick glance upstairs, Vanessa's whining still echoing, he tucked the wad of cash and the crypto-loaded USB into a small metal box, then slid it into the hiding spot. A few nudges, and the panel clicked back into place. Invisible. Safe. He stood, dusting off his hands, a grim satisfaction settling in. Vanessa could rant all she wanted, but he was 2 steps ahead now. Her reign of chaos was on borrowed time, and so, he suspected, was their marriage. 2 weeks later, Vanessa Parker's life had gone from champagne wishes to dishwater dreams, and she was not handling it gracefully. The credit card stayed dead, Ethan's resolve stayed ironclad, and her once bottomless well of cash had dried up like a puddle in the desert. No more $80 facials, no more impulse buys from that overpriced boutique downtown. She'd even canceled a brunch with Sarah and the girls, mumbling something about a headache while secretly praying they wouldn't smell the desperation seeping through her excuse. It hit rock bottom on a rainy Tuesday night. Vanessa, sprawled on the couch in yoga pants she hadn't washed in a week, tapped confirm on a sushi delivery order. Nothing fancy, just enough to feel like she still had some dignity. The app chirped back, payment declined, insufficient funds. She stared at the screen, her stomach growling in betrayal. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered, tossing the phone aside like it had personally insulted her. Dinner ended up being a sad packet of ramen from the back of the pantry, the kind Ethan used to eat in college before he started bankrolling her glitter-dusted lifestyle. The next morning she yanked open her closet and faced the wreckage of her vanity. Rows of designer dresses mocked her, unwearable without the matching bags and heels she couldn't replace. She dug past the silk and sequins, fishing out a faded sweater and jeans from her pre-Ethan days, clothes she'd once sneered at as basic. Now they were her lifeline. She caught her reflection in the mirror and winced. This is temporary, she told herself, voice firm despite the quiver. I'll figure this out. Her friends weren't buying the act, though. Sarah texted about a new wine bar opening. Come with us, it's only $50 a head. And Vanessa fired back a vague, maybe next time. The group chat went quiet, the kind of quiet that screamed suspicion. She could feel their whispers. Where's the old Vanessa? The one who'd drop 100 on cocktails without blinking? Her throne was slipping, and the court was starting to notice. Reality was a cold slap she couldn't dodge. Without Ethan's money, her world wasn't just shrinking, it was collapsing. The brunches, the shopping sprees, the Instagram-worthy life she'd built, it all hinged on him, the man she'd dismissed as a nag and a buzzkill. But admitting that? Facing the fact that she'd torched her own empire? No way. Vanessa Parker didn't lose. Not yet. She paced the living room, her mind churning. She'd charm him, guilt him, outsmart him, whatever it took to get those funds flowing again. This was a hiccup, not a surrender. She'd bend this mess back in her favor, even if it meant swallowing a little pride with that stale ramen. One quiet evening, the air in the Parker house shifted. Subtle, but enough to make Ethan pause mid-scroll on his laptop. Vanessa shuffled into the living room, her usual swagger dialed down to a tentative flicker. Hey, she said, her voice softer than he'd heard in months, maybe years. Can we talk? Ethan raised an eyebrow but nodded, setting the laptop aside. She perched on the edge of the couch, picking at her nails. I've been thinking. Maybe I haven't been pulling my weight around here. I could, do more. The words hung there, wobbly and unsure, like a tightrope walker with a bad case of vertigo. Ethan didn't respond right away, just watched as she stood and grabbed a rag, half-heartedly swiping at the dusty coffee table. The next day, she tackled the kitchen, slowly, like she was decoding an alien language, stacking dishes with the enthusiasm of a kid forced to eat broccoli. By dinner, she'd managed a meal, a couple of overcooked chicken breasts and a lumpy pile of mashed potatoes that looked more like a cry for help than a side dish. Symbolic, sure, but hardly a Michelin star apology. Ethan saw it all, the cleanup, the cooking, the timid glances his way, and felt nothing but skepticism. It was a performance, a shaky audition for the role of wife she'd long since quit. He ate the chicken in silence, the dry bite sticking in his throat as she sat across from him, waiting for a reaction he didn't have to give. A few nights later, she cracked. They were in the kitchen, the air thick with unspoken words, when Vanessa's facade finally buckled. Okay, fine, she said, her voice breaking. I've been selfish. I get it now. I've messed up, Ethan. I want to fix this. Us. Tears welled up, spilling down her cheeks as she wrung her hands. I've been awful, and I'm sorry. Can't we try again? Ethan leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, his face a mask of calm that hid the storm inside. He'd waited years to hear those words, but now they rang hollow, like a bell with no clapper. Vanessa, he said, steady and low, I'm glad you see it. But trust? That's not a switch you can just flip back on. You've spent years treating me like a means to an end, and I've spent years pretending it didn't kill something in me. Fixing that, it's not impossible, but it's a heck of a mountain to climb, and I don't know if I've got the strength left to try. Her tears came harder now, a messy flood she didn't bother to hide. I mean it, Ethan, I'll change, I'll do whatever it takes, she pleaded, stepping closer, her hands reaching for him. But he didn't budge. Didn't soften. His eyes were steel, and she saw it. The wall he'd built, brick by brick, while she'd been too busy to notice. Please, she whispered, voice cracking. Don't give up on me. I didn't, he said quietly. You gave up on us a long time ago. I'm just done pretending otherwise. Vanessa sank onto a chair, sobs shaking her shoulders as the truth settled in like damp rot. This wasn't just a fight. It was the endgame. Ethan's resolve, his quiet certainty, screamed what he hadn't yet said out loud. Divorce was coming, and it wasn't far off. She'd played her last card, and it wasn't enough, not even close. Ethan had made up his mind, and once that switch flipped, there was no going back. He'd spent too many nights staring at the ceiling, replaying the slow death of their marriage. And he was done. Done with the excuses, the half-baked apologies, the whole exhausting charade. So one crisp morning, he walked into the house with divorce papers in hand, the weight of them feeling less like a burden and more like a key to freedom. Vanessa was on the couch, scrolling her phone, when he dropped the stack on the coffee table in front of her. "Sign these," he said, voice flat but firm. "I've got a 2-day trip for work. When I'm back, I want you packed and gone." No yelling, no venom, just a quiet, unshakable resolve. Vanessa's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock that quickly melted into disbelief. "You're serious?" she stammered, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Ethan, wait, we can still—" "No," he cut her off, already turning to grab his suitcase. "We can't. You've got 2 days. That's it." He paused, meeting her gaze one last time. "This isn't up for debate." She scrambled to her feet, desperation clawing at her voice. "I can change. I swear I can. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't do this." Ethan stopped, suitcase in hand, and looked at her, not with anger but with a tired clarity that cut deeper than any shout. "You could have changed before, Vanessa. You didn't want to. I'm not waiting around for a sequel that's never coming." And with that, he walked out, leaving her staring at the papers like they were a death sentence. Vanessa knew it was over, had felt it creeping up like a shadow she couldn't outrun. But losing Ethan for good lit a fire of panic under her. She'd always thought she could charm her way back, play the right card at the last second. Now, with the clock ticking and his footsteps fading, she was out of moves. She sank onto the couch, the papers glaring at her, and realized she'd have to do something drastic, or at least make it look that way. 2 days later, Ethan stepped back into the house, expecting a quiet exit stage left. Instead, he walked into a crime scene of chaos. The living room was a wreck, cushions tossed, shelves half empty, the TV stand missing its base. The kitchen fared worse, cabinets stripped of anything remotely valuable, even the toaster gone. His recliner vanished. The coffee table held the divorce papers, signed in Vanessa's jagged scrawl, and a note in her looping handwriting. "Goodbye, Ethan. Here's my lawyer's number. He'll handle everything. I never want to see you again." He scanned the room, piecing it together. She hadn't just packed her clothes. She'd raided the place like a pirate with a moving van, taking more than her share, and then some. The petty theft of it all hit him, and a slow, crooked smile crept across his face. "Oh my God," he said to the empty house, a dry chuckle escaping. "What a mercenary." No rage, no regret, just a strange, bittersweet relief. She'd shown her true colors one last time, and it only confirmed what he'd known. He was better off without her. The hidden cash and crypto were still safe in the basement, untouched by her sticky fingers. He'd rebuild, new furniture, new life, new peace. The house was quieter now, emptier in a good way, and for the first time in years, he could breathe without the weight of her entitlement pressing down on him. The court had been a breeze. Vanessa got a pittance. Ethan, he got peace, and that felt like winning the lottery. Grinning to himself one evening, he decided to check his ace in the hole, the basement stash. Cash and crypto, his safety net, tucked away behind that loose panel. As he descended the stairs, he couldn't help but gloat a little in his head. "I played this right," he thought. "Kept my head, secured my future." She got nothing but her attitude and a few overpriced throw pillows. He crouched by the water heater, popped the panel loose and reached in. Nothing. His hand swiped empty air. No metal box, no cash, no USB. Just dust and a cold, sinking dread. Ethan froze, heart thudding. "No way," he muttered, digging deeper as if the stash might magically reappear. It didn't. He sat back on his heels, mind racing. Vanessa had to be. But how? She couldn't have known, couldn't have found it. She barely knew where the laundry room was, let alone a hidden nook in the basement. Unless she'd been smarter than he'd ever given her credit for. Anger flared, hot and bitter, chasing away the shock. He stormed upstairs, grabbed his phone, and dialed her number, straight to voicemail. "Pick up, you thief," he growled, then switched to texts, firing off a barrage. "You stole from me, didn't you? The cash, the flash drive. Where is it?" No response. "Give it back, Vanessa. At least the drive. It's useless without the key. Just a hunk of plastic. Do one decent thing for once." The messages sat there, unread, mocking him with their little gray ticks. He paced, fury giving way to panic. The private key, that scribbled string of nonsense he jotted down when he set up the cold cryptocurrency wallet. Without it, the crypto was locked forever. He tore through his desk, flipping papers, dumping drawers. Nothing. The scrap of paper he'd stashed in an old manual? Gone. The backup he'd meant to make? Never happened. Ethan sank into his chair, hands in his hair, the realization hitting like a freight train. Vanessa hadn't just taken his stuff. She'd cleaned him out like a pro, key and all. How? Maybe she'd snooped while he was on that work trip, piecing it together from some careless clue. She'd always been sharp when it came to getting what she wanted. He'd just never thought she'd turn that on him so ruthlessly. And the worst part? He couldn't even prove it. No receipts, no cameras, just a hidden stash she'd somehow sniffed out. The police would laugh him out of the station. Ethan slumped back, staring at the ceiling. "Should have ended it fast," he muttered, the regret bitter on his tongue. "Quick and clean, not this slow bleed." He'd waited too long, underestimated her one last time, and now she'd turned his victory into her heist. Vanessa was gone, richer for it, and Ethan was left with an empty house, an emptier wallet, and a lesson he'd never forget. The story's over, but the questions burn. How did Vanessa pull off this slick little heist? Did she snoop, guess, or play him all along? And Ethan, what mistakes did he make? Where did he drop the ball? Trusting her too long, hiding the stash too lazily, or missing the signs of her final move? You tell me, what do you think went down in that house of chaos and cash? Be creative and post your versions in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.